Welcome to Recipes for Impact. This is a storytelling series that shines a spotlight on the incredible work of key leaders driving transformational change in smallholder farms and food systems around the globe. I'm Talon Say, and I'm thrilled to invite you into this space where you'll hear inspiring stories about projects that are making a real difference. We extend a warm welcome from Synergos to all our listeners, especially those from our Shifting the Food Systems community and broader network. Now I'm happy to welcome our guest. Based in Berlin, Germany, she is the head of philanthropy with Climate KIC, specializing in international fundraising, prospect management, and nonprofit management. Her fundraising career spans over 15 years and several sectors, including arts, education, health, animal welfare, and wildlife conservation. So needless to say, her list of accolades goes even further, and I'm excited to introduce Melody Song. Melody, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So I'd love to get more into your work. Can you explain a bit about what Climate KIC does and how does it leverage its network to drive climate innovation and systemic change in food and agriculture?
So Climate KIC, we also call it a KIC. It stands for Climate Knowledge Insights and Community. And we were created by the European Commission 15 years ago to focus on climate innovation. And now we just this year started to become an independent innovation agency, which means that we're no longer funded by the European Commission and being on our own, using a systemic approach in transformation that's related to climate change, which we often say climate is a curse and a blessing in our name, because it's not a climate change, it's a system change. If we don't change the system, we cannot actually solve the problem of climate change. So what we do is that we are an implementer for climate actions on the ground. So food system is one of the systems that we work in. So one of our flagship project is what we call the Ireland Food Transformation Deep Demonstration Project. So the background of it is that Ireland wants to fix how food is grown so that it doesn't harm the planet, because farming is a huge part of Ireland's culture and economy. There are over 137,000 farms in Ireland, but it creates a lot of climate wrecking gases. The goal from the Irish government is to cut farm emission by 25% by 2030. And go fully green by 2050. So this is a policy level change from the Irish government and a goal that they set for themselves, which is quite ambitious. Yeah, so we were tasked by the Irish government to implement the food transformation experiment, let's say, from a systemic lens. And what it means is that we're not only look at how food is produced or farmers, we're looking at it from the whole food chain, which means that we're looking at it from soil health to regenerative farming, a possibility of carbon farming to farmers, and then move up to the food chain of behavior change, either from a farmer's point of view or from the consumer's point of view. New value chain that created from the food or restoring farmland into peatland, for example, wetland restoration. So we're looking at the whole sweep of solutions that are in front of us that engages various actors in the system to create solutions together. So this is methodology we call a deep demonstration, which is really experiment-based, and it's really rooted in this work of everyone from farmers to policymakers work together to brainstorm ideas. The other aspect is fairness that we're looking into, because many farmers struggles to make ends meet. So we don't want them to take the risk of changing their practice and also hurting their livelihood. So the fairness and the just transition side of things is something that we also put a lot of focus on. And the cool part is that we already got over 280 ideas in action. Yeah, and one of the biggest challenge is changing habit. Some farmers feel that they're blamed for climate issues. So our project really focuses on listening to them and making solutions that actually fit their lives. The lesson learned, it's actually something that we actually learn from all our projects, is that collaboration is easy to say, but very difficult and very costly to do. And when we talk about collaboration, we tend to think, oh, it's easy. Let's just put people in the room, convene, and have them start doing things. But doing that is actually not being funded by a lot of funders, because funders tend to think about actual tangible things instead of funding collaboration itself.
As you say, collaboration is much easier said than done. And I think that because it can be such a difficult road ahead, it can be hard to move beyond short-term goals into long-term systemic solutions. So what would your advice be as to how philanthropy can make that transition for food systems and climate?
So what I've observed over the years working with philanthropy is that philanthropy tend to be very focused on the verticals. Even when we're talking about the food system, the system itself is a vertical. It's also connected to other systems, like climate justice, for example, is really connected to how land is being used, or in some cultures, there's gender issues on land inheritance. So it's like philanthropy tend to be either very regionally focused or thematically focused on the verticals, but it's not doing the systemic work of funding the horizontal connecting and what we call a weaving of these issues and finding the real root cause. Really, what philanthropy we would hope that they would evolve to be is to look at things systemically, not in the short-term view, because climate change is such a long-term thing. Like, it's a long-term game. So therefore, I think it's really important that philanthropists think about horizontals instead of verticals. These horizontal work, a narrative, communication, collaboration, policy, go throughout all of these thematic areas and emphasize on systemic transformation, collaboration, and also invest in scalable.
Thank you for sharing that advice. So let me ask you, what are the critical funding gaps in scaling regenerative farming and ensuring food security, especially for smallholder farmers? You brought that up earlier, that a lot of farmers have trouble making ends meet, and I know that that also affects the food that they have access to.
There are gaps that can be filled actually by philanthropy. One of them I've mentioned before is that changing practice is risky for farmers. Changing from traditional farming to regenerative farming, it needs insurance and risk mitigation. And second of all, the funding for advocating policies and incentives for sustainable farming. And then the third one is capacity building and knowledge sharing. So the farmers in Ireland, for example, are not talking to farmers in Finland, for example, but they all have the same problem. So Finland, Poland, Germany, Ireland, they're all big hotspots for wetland restoration. So they can restore wetland. It becomes a big carbon sink, and it resolves a lot of issues for Europe. So if they can all talk together and share experiences, that journey will not become very scary for one smallholder farms. So how can we fund platforms that actually give them opportunities to come together as a community of practice? And lastly, I think the main problem is farmers have limited access to finance themselves because they're very small, their income is low. So kind of financial facilities to help them to access funding, that would be really good too.
What changes are needed in the funding landscape then to prioritize policy, advocacy, and multi-stakeholder collaboration for greater impact?
I think changing hearts and mind is essential for driving policy change. That is another horizontal area, is the storytelling and narrative building efforts to communicate the urgency of climate crisis and the benefits of sustainable solutions. If we can imagine a future together, there's a pull from that future that we can actually be drawn at and be inspired to. So people have more willingness to change, to becoming a better planet together. So that collective imagination is something that I don't see being funded, or not enough being funded. So that imagination, that narrative, to me, is one of the most important things in terms of policy advocacy.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think storytelling is a very critical piece in any transformational change. And speaking of storytelling, I'd love to shoot you back to Melody from several years ago. If Melody from today could speak to Melody from years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
There was a huge transition within the organization itself from many years ago when it first started, because when it first started, we think that we can make a difference by creating lots of innovation, lots of technology. We kind of believe in the silver bullet of technology will save us all. But as the journey goes along, we discover that only having technology is not enough. If we don't have policy, we don't have people buying into this kind of change, and we don't have, like I said, the collective imagination, and we don't have businesses and farmers to all do it together, we cannot make this change whatsoever. So definitely, I'll definitely tell myself or the organization to switch to a system lens and system thinking, and to involve as many people as possible on the journey, because you cannot make it on your own. We cannot change on our own. So that's the key. That's the key thing. Together, not alone.
Together, not alone. That is the perfect, heartfelt message to end on. Melody, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to sit with us and to share your story. I would like to thank all of our listeners, our partners, our teachers, and our community.